Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm joined today by Mr. Liam Collins, who's a former colonel for the US Army. And today with Liam, we'll talk about the war in Ukraine. Liam, thanks for your time. Would you like to introduce yourself first so that you can give my viewers a little bit of background about who you are?
Yeah, so I spent 27 years in the U.S. military. Most of it is special operations and special forces, and spent time in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world. Most relevant to the current conflict from 2016 to 2018, served as the defense advisor to Ukraine for defense reform. So I've been studying that ever since the war broke out, and recently just returned from a trip to Ukraine a week ago.
Well, that's very interesting. So probably you can give us a very unique angle because you have very recent news. So the first thing that I would like to ask you is when this war started little more than 1 year ago, Russia expected it to last a few weeks. Then after a year, the war is still going on. How can Russia underrate Ukraine's reaction like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was just really a complete misunderstanding of what Ukraine was going to do. They thought Ukraine would have the same capability that they had back in 2014, but they dedicated significant effort into reforming their military and creating a Western style military capable of decentralized execution. So they misunderstood the capability militarily, and politically they thought the populace would just kind of cave over and kind of welcome them with open arms, and Zelensky would just capitulate upon this kind of force rolling across the border. So they really miscalculated on a political and military level.
We keep hearing, at least we have heard that from since a year ago, that Russia is losing soldiers, that Russia's army is losing pieces, but still Russia is holding this. How long can Russia bear this?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the million-dollar question for everybody, is how long can either side really sustain this? In Ukraine, right, they're fighting for their freedom, and so they will continue to fight until they have no weapons left to fight with. So as long as the West continues to supply them, they'll continue to fight. Russia, same kind of thing, right? It's hard for an authoritarian to walk away with a loss, so they're going to continue to sustain this. But it seems like some experts say by the end of the year that stockpiles will be exhausted to some level. But I expect the fight to go on for several years, even if it slows down. It just can't maintain the current pace that it's been going at indefinitely.
Well, what way out of this do we have? This is another million-dollar question, because I hear politicians also in Italy saying that we should start discussing like a peace deal or something like that. But what other way out do we have other than an internal coup against Putin?
Yeah, I mean, if you look, right, a negotiated settlement, that's not right. There's no way Ukraine will agree to that because they never got their territory in the Donbass back after 2014 or Crimea. And so any kind of negotiated agreement, they know they're not going to get that territory back. So that doesn't seem plausible. Russia's not willing to walk away and just give up the territory they've already taken. And Ukraine is going to continue to fight. So really what you're left with, it's going to go on until it becomes too painful for Russia, or Ukraine is just not capable of sustaining a conventional fight, and then it'll turn to an insurgency. And so I really think the most likely scenario is eventually it becomes so painful for Russia that they'll have to pull out. Again, this is conditional on continued Western supply of Ukraine, but that's probably many months and most likely years away.
We're seeing now, probably for the first time, a new way of warfare in which allied nations, instead of intervening, are providing Ukraine with weapons. Is this working?
Yes, without a doubt, it's working. And this really isn't a new way of fighting. Wars have always done this and relied on external help. I think what's new about this is really the sheer scale of it. That's really what's different. The concept of assisting, I wouldn't say necessarily an ally, but assisting a nation in defending its freedom and sovereignty. That's not new. It's just the scale of it is what's new for this one.
And also the other thing we as West were doing is sanctions against Russia. Are they effective? Are they doing anything against Russia?
Yeah, I mean, the Russians, I would say, are marginally successful. And part of that problem is, right, the reliance on Western nations for natural gas that's coming out of Russia. And as long as they're dependent on Russia for that, the ability to inflict harm on Russia is going to be mitigated to some extent, because sanctions, right? I think people often forget that sanctions hurt both parties. right? It's just you're trying to hurt the person you're sanctioning more, and they don't have an ability to get that the amount of natural gas they need from other places, and so they're relying on Russia, and so therefore the sanctions can't be as harmful as they could have otherwise been.
Are we now facing danger of giving weapons to Ukraine then that at the end of the war can end up in the hands of violent extremist group that can use them against either us or against the legitimate government, as happened, for instance, in Afghanistan with the Taliban, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a risk. I think in this, it's much lower, right? I mean, keep in mind, Afghanistan in the 80s, we were arming, right, a non-state actor. This is a defense establishment, right? It's an organized military. They have no desire for these weapons to get in the hands of somebody else. They want to maintain control of these because they want to maintain their own control of their nation, and getting these weapons into someone else's hands is a threat to them as well. And so I think it's two fundamentally different things. Again, there is some risk to that, but it's very low just because it's going to a nation state this time around, where in the 80s in Afghanistan, it was not.
Well, I agree with that if we think about the first rise to the power of the Taliban. But in the second one, we actually gave weapons to the legitimate government of Afghanistan, and then weapons were stolen.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Right. In the most recent arming, yeah, I mean, and those were right in both Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, those were not, those again were different, right? There was no political will behind either Iraq or really Afghanistan to have a national army. And when you don't have that political will behind it, you're going to have those problems where they're going to fold when they face really not a existential threat such as Islamic State or the Taliban, that they could have easily defeated these opponents, as opposed to just kind of caving and conceding them territory, or in the case of Afghanistan, the entire government. And so I think it's a little different here. And again, if Ukraine ultimately falls, right, these weapons are going to go into Russia's hands without a doubt. And that's probably the greater fear than going into someone else's hands.
Okay, I understand. Well, let me ask you something totally different. We see a lot of Russian propaganda spreading also on Western media. For instance, in Italy, we also have pro-Russia people talking in talk shows pretty much every night. So how can editors be so dumb? Or are they paid by the Kremlin? So what's going on in Western media?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say I'm actually surprised at how little or how much lower the Russian propaganda has been than what I expected, right? I actually expect it to be much more significant. So Ukraine's actually done a really good job of getting their message out, which they did not do in 2014 and 2015. So I think the West has actually gotten a lot better towards seeing that. But without a doubt, right, there are some people that are legitimate sympathizers with Russia, and there might be others that are on the payroll, right, willing to take a cut just to publish anything that really those aren't true news sources, right? Those are whatever you want to call them, but they're not credible sources. And I think most educated people can tell the difference, but there's a lot that can get fooled. And so, yeah, I think it's a complicated answer, but it's always going to be there. That's not new. The differences in the 21st century, right, with the internet and everything else, information can get shared a lot faster.
Well, a lot of far left or far right parties, for instance, in Italy, are now saying that we should, at a certain point, stop sending weapons to Ukraine so that the war doesn't escalate. For instance, in Italy, this has been said by Matteo Salvini and by the Movimento 5 Stelle. To me, this is totally nonsense. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that make that argument, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, otherwise, we're hearkening back to the days of World War II, right? Are we just gonna, if this was Italy's territory that Russia had invaded, would the Italian citizens just want to say, okay, we don't need any more support, let's just let Russia take us over, and we'll be a Russian proxy and no longer be Italy? I mean, that's really what it is for Ukraine. And so I think people maybe forget. I mean, the Cold War was not that long ago. I mean, I don't know why people in the West all of a sudden, in small numbers, are Russian apologists or sympathizers. Let's go back to the Cold War era, right? I mean, that's what Russia's trying to do, is reestablish this, take over Eastern Europe, right, where it can, right? It's pretty much got Belarus in its back pocket. It's trying to take Ukraine. It'll try to expand beyond that if they're not stopped. And so, it really comes to supporting them, and it's really not that expensive that we're doing that. And I've also heard the argument, okay, our military preparedness, right? If Germany gives Ukraine tanks, they won't be prepared for, Russia. Well, this is the war. Russia has no ability to go anywhere else, right? They're fighting the war here. So you don't need to maintain a large stockpile because Russia's being held just in Ukraine. And so neither argument really makes a lot of sense.
Well, let me ask you something that I've never asked anyone else before. What do you think about President Zelensky, the way he is behaving, the way he's leading the country, or the way he's like also going on TV shows or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, he's masterful at what he's doing, right? I mean, I think he's letting his war fighters, his Ministry of Defense, fight the war, and he's really going external engagement to in order to sustain it, right? He's got to have the will of the people. He's maintaining his popularity with them as a phenomenal wartime commander, and really to sustain the fight, he's got to get that external aid, and he's been masterful at that. I mean, regardless of how this turns out, I mean, he will probably go down as one of the greatest wartime leaders in a long time in Europe.
Well, and also I think this was unexpected because he's not experienced in this. He used to be a comedian.
Right. I mean, and that's part of why Putin thought it would be so easy and Zelensky would just capitulate, because prior to the war, he had relatively low approval ratings. And you have this actor, and he thought, okay, it won't be hard to make him cave. And we all remember in the opening days of the war when the U.S. offered Zelensky a way out, and he said, I don't need a plane or whatever. I need ammunition. And that set the tone for his nation at that time.
I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. This is what he said. Yes, I remember. That's
right. Yep. Exactly. Yep. And so that kind of set the tone for the nation and what they were doing.
Well, I started this interview by asking you what's going to happen in the long run. Now, let me ask you the opposite question. What's going to happen in the next few days or weeks? Is Russia going to try to escalate this by increasing the firepower?
I mean, Russia can't do anymore, right? They're throwing everything they have at this. There's no ability for Russia to escalate. I mean, they're throwing massive amounts of manpower and resources, ammunition, artillery, right, and to make small incremental gains of little tactical or strategic value. That's all they can do because that's all they're good at is mass. That's their one advantage. Ukraine, meanwhile, has better trained soldiers, better led soldiers, better motivated soldiers. They know how to fight with discipline, initiative. And so we got this really small, better army against this large one. And so that's how we've seen the war play out to date. And that's how we're going to see it play out in the near future. So Russia may get Bakhmut, right? A city that means relatively little in terms of tactical or strategic significance, maybe more of a political thing than anything else for Russia. But what Ukraine does is, because they're smaller, they defend where they can. They retreat and give up territory where they must, because they have to preserve combat power so that they can fight and attack at a time and place that's advantageous to them. And that's what we've seen, right? They successfully defended Kyiv in the opening month of the war. We saw them conduct a large counteroffensive to take back significant amount of territory in Kharkiv and Kherson Oblast. So that's what we're going to see out once this kind of Russia culminates their ability to conduct this. This is their big offensive right now that's not doing much. Once that kind of runs its course, then I wouldn't be surprised to see Ukraine mount a counteroffensive somewhere else, kind of in a maneuver warfare style that they've been successful to date.
Well, you've been to Ukraine like last week. How did you find the country? Is it a hopeful country? Is it a desperate country?
No, without a doubt. I think, I mean, the people are hopeful. I mean, they're the economy is going where it's not in the East, right? You got to have an economy maintained to support the war. And so, like a lot of places, right? I mean, it's the war is being fought out on the front in the East, but other parts of the country, life carries on because it has to. They have to continue to produce and support the nation. And so, depending on where you're at, if you're in the East, right, then you're going to want to, get wear your body armor or a helmet. But if you're elsewhere in the country, it's probably not that much different than other places, other than you're going to get some air raid sirens and you see sandbags around different places.
Well, Liam, thanks for your time again. We went through all the questions that I had for you, so we reached the end of this discussion. And I'm very thankful for your very precious explanations and for the unique angle that you were able to give us. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.